We will not be having our jobs taken away and giving to robots. We will not allow you to take away our dignity.
On May 2nd, 2023, the Writers Guild of America, which represents over 11,000 screenwriters, went on strike over ongoing labor disputes with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, the group that represents the studios and investors in Hollywood. The strike immediately halted live, late-night television and caused postponement of virtually every major movie and television show currently in production in Hollywood. Weeks later, after failing to reach an agreement, SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, joined the WGA on strike on Friday, July 14th. Both groups held the line until an eventual deal was struck by the WGA on Sunday, September 24th. 146 days of labor stoppage, making it the second longest strike in Hollywood history. But the fight for SAG-AFTRA continues on at the time of filming this video. But this strike, in particular, was not just a win for the unions. Instead, what it illustrated was exactly what happens when you piss off perhaps the most well-known and wealthy group of individuals in America, and simultaneously take away the one thing Americans love the most: entertainment.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
For many, this movement is one of celebration, and prompted for the first time in American history a sitting president to join the picket line with striking auto workers, stating,
"You deserve what you've earned, and you've earned a hell of a lot more than you're getting paid now."
From Amazon to Apple, Chipotle to REI, Starbucks to Trader Joe's, workers are organizing at some of the most well-known companies in America and in industries previously thought ununionizable. They're also doing so against the tide of a decades-long decline in union membership, which led to eviscerated benefits and wages that haven't kept pace with the cost of living. Unions, it seems, are finally posed to make a comeback in America. But all of this kind of begs the question: why did unions become so unpopular in America in the first place? After all, unions are a cornerstone of the modern European workforce. Today, more than 2/3 of workers in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland are union members. In France and Austria, a minority of workers are in unions, but 98% are covered by collective bargaining contracts. And in Germany, unions are credited as being the backbone of our resilient economy, with unions having a seat at the table at most German companies. And as a consequence, they not only advocate for higher wages, they also fight to keep the companies alive, and therefore keep jobs in Germany. So what exactly is so different between the ways that unions organize on either side of the Atlantic? And what ultimately could the United States learn about the ways unions work and are successful here in Europe? Well, let's take a look. Today's video is made possible by our supporters on Patreon. If you would like to gain early access to videos before they're uploaded to YouTube, as well as participate in exclusive Q&A sessions with me, please consider supporting my channel at patreon.com/type Ashton. The model of unionizing that dominates American labor, familiar from movies like Norma Rae, has been in place since the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. Because unionization happens in individual companies and workplaces, the system is known as enterprise-level bargaining. And if you're covered by an enterprise-level union contract, well, it probably works pretty well for you. Unionized workers in the US enjoy significantly higher wages and better benefits than non-union workers, and have greater recourse if they're being mistreated by their employer. The problem is that as unions shrink, fewer and fewer people get those benefits. And that's partially due to the structure of the enterprise-level bargaining system itself. It creates all of these perverse incentives for employers to oppose workers trying to join the union. Unions get higher pay for their members by demanding money that would otherwise go to shareholders and executives. And so those shareholders and executives have every reason to fight union drives, including through intense and often illegal tactics like calling mandatory meetings where workers are subjected to anti-union arguments, and threats, including threats to close the plant or eliminate jobs. But perhaps an even bigger reason for the decline of unions overall, rather than just simply looking at the resistance from the corporations themselves, is that traditionally, unionized companies in the United States have added fewer jobs over time than their non-unionized counterparts. Far from a resurgence, the share of American workers in a union has continued to decline. Last year, the union membership rate fell by 0.2 percentage points to 10.1%, the lowest on record. And that was the second year in a row that the union rate fell. Only 1 in 10 American workers are actually now in a union, down from nearly 1 in 3 workers during the heyday of unions back in the 1950s. But don't get me wrong, there's actually also data that suggests that all of the fanfare that unions have recently got in the US media might not all have just been hype. For one, the absolute number of American workers in unions did, in fact, grow in 2022 by approximately 200,000. It's just that the number of non-union jobs grew faster. The National Labor Relations Board saw 2,510 union representation petitions filed in the fiscal year of 2022, a 53% increase over the previous year. Now, that's hardly a game changer, but heck, it's something. But overall, the decline in unions actually does have a few different causes that we can look to. One, unions are most successful in now stagnating or shrinking industries like manufacturing and transportation. And 2, investors are less willing to put money into firms where unions capture some of their profits. And 3, unions increase labor costs for employers who respond by hiring fewer workers. But in contrast, European countries, and quite honestly, most rich countries outside of the United States, have found an ingenious way around this. Rather than looking at enterprise-level unioning, unions there not only bargain at the company level, but at the sectoral level, negotiating for all workers in a particular industry rather than individual companies or firms. In France, for example, an employers' federation representing restaurants will negotiate with a union representing all restaurant workers. They reach a deal, and then the government extends that deal to cover all restaurants and all restaurant workers. Everyone in the sector enjoys the pay and benefits that the union got employers to agree to. Because every company, no matter how many of its employees are actually in that union, has to abide by the same pay and benefit deal. Companies then have less incentive to discourage union membership. Firms with more union members don't have any competitive disadvantage relative to firms with fewer. They're all paying the same wages and offering the same benefits. And employment growth doesn't necessarily vary among firms based on how many workers are in unions. So there's no reason for union membership to decay as firms with more union members do worse. Now, if I'm going to be realistic here, a union of fast food workers petitioning to get even wages and benefits across all restaurants in the United States is pretty impossible, particularly at the national level. But the recent fights across the US for a $15 minimum wage in states like New York, Connecticut, and California does illustrate that a path to sectoral bargaining could be successful at the state level. Now, there are actually some nuances here, but those states that actually did successfully petition for a $15 minimum wage did so by implementing something called a wage board, something that's actually not so common anymore, but actually dates back to the Great Depression. In California, this was facilitated in September of 2022 when Governor Newsom signed AB 257, the Fast Food Accountability and Standards Recovery Act, which establishes a 10-member fast food council within the state's Department of Industrial Relations. And wage boards, like the one working in California, have the authority to mandate pay scales and benefits for whole industries, after consultation with businesses and unions. And that's an awful lot like how European countries implement sectoral bargaining. But the fact that this could happen at the state level is pretty important. Even modest labor law reform efforts like the Wage Act, which would have authorized tougher penalties for employer violations of existing laws protecting workers, have pretty much been dead on arrival in Congress. And in a way, sectoral bargaining is a natural extension of alt-labor approaches that have become popular in the labor movement in the last decade. And if we look at unions, specifically sectoral bargaining, it could actually be a really interesting tool in order to achieve better political and economic equality. And maybe it could be the fix we need to stop the downward spiral that's been happening with unions in the United States for decades now. Studies show that sectoral bargaining significantly increases the number of workers covered by collective agreements that lead to higher wages, better benefits, and safer working conditions. As the researchers at the OECD explain it, collective bargaining coverage is high and stable only in countries where multi-employer agreements, i.e. at the sector or national level, are negotiated. In addition, researchers find that sectoral bargaining also helps close pay gaps for women and people of color, and significantly reduces economic inequality. Sectoral bargaining incentivizes companies to compete based on greater productivity rather than lower pay, because it sets higher compensation floors and encourages employers to provide similar pay to workers who do similar jobs. Broad-based bargaining can also reduce employee turnover, promote workplace collaboration, and incentivize worker training. The international evidence is pretty clear. Strong unions and collective bargaining frameworks are the best tools for delivering decent pay, better work conditions, and stable jobs. But there are actually a lot more other benefits beyond just better wages, and those actually have to do with the benefits themselves.
I expect the government to Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, working with trade unions and employers, to rapidly reach a compromise.
While sectoral bargaining could offer US unions a way out of the abyss, it has its limitations. 98% of French workers may be covered by some kind of bargained contract, but only 7.7% of French people are actively enrolled in a union, an even smaller share than in the United States. And this low membership means that unions can't always negotiate the best deals. A significant share of sectoral contracts in France specify minimum wages that are actually lower than France's legal minimum, meaning they have no practical effect. It also hampers unions' abilities to know what workers really want, and makes them reliant on the government to extend deals, and weakens the union's financial standing because few members are around to pay those dues. However, there could be a surprisingly simple plan to get around all of this. You just kind of gotta look northward. In some Nordic countries, they implement something known as the Ghent system, after the Belgian town where it originated. And it works by essentially letting unions run the unemployment insurance system, using subsidies from the government. Today, the Ghent system is a key part of how Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Belgium have achieved the highest union membership rates in the developed world. In the United States, unemployment insurance is funded through taxes on employers, jointly administered by the federal government and the states. But in other countries, you are required to actively walk into a union office and sign up in order to receive those benefits if you lost your job. That put workers in close contact with unions and encouraged them to join. And research shows that letting unions run benefits like unemployment insurance benefits everyone. In Europe, one study from 2005 found that 85% of unemployed people in Denmark and Sweden collected unemployment insurance, compared with only 20% of jobless workers in the United Kingdom and 47% of jobless workers in Germany. And in the United States, unions and worker centers do have a proven track record of representing workers' interests and helping them navigate the often complex and burdensome processes of applying for benefits. This is particularly true for less educated workers and Black and Hispanic workers who, when unionized, are able to access unemployment benefits at similar rates to those of their more advantaged counterparts.
The European economy is doing better than the German economy. Germany is the sick man of Europe in the moment.
Now, way back in 1999, The Economist magazine published an article originally penned by Dr. Holger Schmieding, which called Germany the sick man of Europe. Now, at that time, the German economy had just emerged from a technical recession and was projected to grow much more slowly than other major European economies. Citing high taxes and the high cost of labor, German firms were tempted to move production to Southern and Eastern Europe, which threatened to increase an already pretty high unemployment rate. But over the course of the past couple decades, unions and employers and the German states really have worked together to try to adapt and figure out a way to pick their economy up and make it work. Germany was able to greatly reduce its labor costs and encourage German companies to stay home, halting the decline of German manufacturing, thanks in large part to unions. Recognizing the threat to the German industry at the time, unions voluntarily accepted wage moderation in the early 2000s. Combine this with the benefits of a cheap euro, and these lower wages then made Germany much, much more competitive. And we see this benefit come out again anytime major global markets enter into a recession. Back in 2008, the effect of the recession had dramatically different effects on the German economy than it did on the US economy. Compared to the United States, German employers were far more likely to reduce their workers' hours and then hire them back full-time when the recession ended and demand returned. Whereas in the US, companies tend to shed workers in lean times and are slow to rehire, resulting in greater long-term job losses. Now, on the public side of things, the German system has an unemployment insurance system called short-time compensation, and it pretty much does what the name suggests, compensating workers when their hours are reduced. And thus firms can continue to pay their workers, and the unemployment system will compensate those firms. In short, it incentivizes them to hold on to their workers. The system also pays for their social insurance benefits, so things like healthcare and retirement benefits don't end up costing the firms quite in the same way they would if they didn't get help from the government. But German companies took this one step further. Over the course of the past few decades, German employers working together with organized labor unions and the state have come up with the system of what some business experts have coined their flexible working time toolkit. And one particular tool in this toolkit is something called working time accounts, which essentially work as time banks. And it's something that Germany's unionized workforce has agreed to as a concession for job security. And essentially the idea is, we'll work overtime hours without demanding overtime pay, so long as you bank those hours. And obviously, you only work overtime when time is good and demand is high, and so you're banking hours. And then if you need to cut hours back, rather than cutting workers' regular pay, they'll just get that pay later when times are bad. Now, it might not be so obvious how something like this would actually lead firms to keep workers or to have firms resist just letting workers go. But the details are actually there if you read into what the union actually negotiated. Employers have to pay those workers everything that is left in those accounts, plus a severance if they were to fire those workers during downtimes. So it really incentivizes the employer to hold on to those workers rather than let them go, because quite frankly, it's probably cheaper. And this crucial part of labor negotiations, particularly between the unions and the German firms, really comes down to this much longer term outlook that they take when looking at their jobs and when negotiating various benefits. And it really relates to kind of what I talked about at the beginning of this chapter. German employers and German unions are much more coordinated in terms of developing this high skills workforce. And so employers have a real incentive to hold on to those employees because they have put real time and money and energy into making sure those employees can deliver exactly what they need. And we don't do that in the United States in large. We just don't. I mean, sure, we might have a handful of model companies that do good by their employees, but honestly, on a whole, workforce development is the purview of the states, the counties, and community colleges. It's kind of all over the place. There's no real incentive to hold on to your workers because you can always, well, hopefully, find another one. Now, I would argue that's really short-term thinking, and in the end, American companies are paying for it in the long run, whether you're looking at recruitment or retraining after all of those layoffs take place. But that long view in Germany is really what I think is leading to their long-term success, and ultimately what is helping their labor market to perform better. And advantages like these, I just don't think are talked enough about when you look at the total effect of unions. Unions in countries like Germany truly have a seat at the table, and often are just as invested in the long-term longevity and success of the business as they are in worker benefits and wages. Companies invest in their workers, and the workers have a vested interest in the success of the company. They want to keep their jobs in Germany, so they work together. Now, I've actually talked about this in a couple of other videos, but I can't help but think that the big reason why German workers report greater satisfaction with their employers, report higher productivity, and stay at their jobs for longer tenures all has to go down to the better working conditions and better working relationships that they have with their employers, all thanks to unions. But I would love to hear from you down in the comment section on what you think the role of unions have been in the overall workplace and workplace conditions that you've experienced in your home country. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to unions and worker benefits and ultimately the labor market. So with such different variations between different countries, I think this could be a really interesting discussion for us to have down in the comments of this particular video. So please, let me know what your experiences have been like. I really look forward to reading them as always. And if you enjoyed what you saw today, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button. It really goes a long way towards helping this channel. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!